And it says it's recording, so once again, we are recording. Okay, I'm just going to pull up my slides. Okay, so the East Kingdom has Equestrian, go figure. I actually didn't know this until I had been in the SCA for a good 5 years, so I wanted to try and present something on Equestrian for the general Scadians so that you can actually figure out what's what and just know about the general sense of Equestrian in the East Kingdom. Before we get started, we have to go over the very basics. The harassment and bullying policy. The SCA prohibits harassment and bullying of all individuals and groups. Participants engaging in this behavior are subject to appropriate sanctions. If you are subjected to harassment, bullying, or retaliation, or if you become aware of anyone being harassed or bullied, contact a national president of the SCA or your kingdom's board ombudsman. So, horses are not as common in the East Kingdom as they are in other areas because we are tighter on space than other areas. And because of that, people in the East Kingdom don't necessarily know as much about horses as the general equestrian community would prefer. When you're at an event with horses, you have to sign an additional waiver, and you're going to obviously have the chance of running into the horses. They are large prey animals that can move very quickly.
Prey animals?
Yes, they are prey animals. They are constantly on the lookout for things around them that could possibly be trying to attack them, kill them, hurt them, eat them. So if you notice, they have the ears that rotate and they try to keep a general sense of what's going on around them. That being said, modern domesticated horses can be really bad at that sometimes, and if they see something from the left, it doesn't exist from the right. So just because they saw you going in this direction doesn't mean they're going to realize you're going to be there coming in this direction, just like that rock might magically appear. So keep that in mind. They will have a fight or flight reaction. Flight being the most common, fight if they can't get away. So if you scare them, they might go running and bolting, and you're kind of really small compared to a horse. If you're in their way, it doesn't really matter. They can go through you. So if you're approaching the horses, please make sure that they know you're there. Try to walk with some sort of noise. If you're walking over to the horse area with a friend, talk to your friend. Maybe announce yourself. Hail to the arena. Hello. Something. Just make sure that they know that you're there and coming. Don't try to tiptoe up and suddenly appear. Try to keep track of where the horses are relative to you and keep in mind that fact so you don't do something super abruptly to scare them. One thing that you also want to keep in mind is that horses can have very sensitive and delicate digestive systems sometimes. They can be very mouthy sometimes. They can have personalities just like any other person, I guess not any other person, any other mammal, I guess. So try to not take things for granted. Don't go up and just touch or feed someone's horse. I want to ask permission. Horses can have allergies. You don't want to necessarily give a horse something that's going to make them sick. If you ask, a lot of the time, people will be okay with you petting or touching their horse. But make sure you ask. It's a simple thing, just like if you were approaching a dog, you wouldn't want to just run up and start petting the dog. Don't just run up and start touching the horse. And another really important thing, make sure you wear shoes that are going to protect your feet if you're planning to be around the horses. Horses weigh a lot, and if they step on you, it's not so pretty. Having shoes can make a big difference between maybe keeping a lot of the skin on your foot or not. Mistress Eleanor mentioned that she saw some really gnarly photos of people being stepped on without shoes, and I was not brave enough to go looking, but I know that twice in the past year I've been stepped on by rather large horses, and I still have a bruised toenail, and that was with good boots and able to pull my foot as quickly as I could out so that it was only my boot under and not my actual toe. But if I didn't have that momentary pause where I could get out from under the leather, it could have been a lot worse than it was. So these are things you just really want to keep in mind. So I'm a biology geek, and I have a degree in physiology and anatomy. So I think comparative anatomy is really cool, and I hope some of you might too. I wanted to just quickly show you how a horse compares to a person. So a lot of the things are the same. Obviously, they have the spine, the ribs, the skull. They have a lot of the same bones, but they're just placed a little bit differently. If you look at this picture, you can see the shoulder blade in red, what you would see the humerus in, forearm in a human. But if you look on a horse, what is essentially their knee is the wrist on a human, and what is essentially their hand is this entire area. So when you're looking at their quote unquote ankle, it's very similar to human's finger bone. And same thing in the back. Their knee is actually way up here compared to what a human's knee would be. And this right here, the hock, is their ankle, which I think that's kind of cool. And as a zoomed in look on their hand, just because I think it's a kind of snarky comparison, you have the wrist here, the metacarpals, everything kind of streamlined, and some of the outside areas went away. So a horse is literally flipping you off the entire time. I don't know, it amuses me. So if you're around horses and hearing people who know about horses talk, you might hear them say certain things. Withers is something you'll hear a lot. It's pretty much the shoulder of the horse. It's where you would measure the horse's height, because it's the highest part of a horse that is stable and can't really change its height easily. A horse can easily raise or lower its head and change that, so you don't measure it at the top of the head like you would on a person. You measure it at the withers. You would typically measure a horse in a unit called a hand. So a hand, which is 4 inches typically, will tell you how big a horse is. Horses are usually in the range of 14 to 17 hands. They can be bigger or smaller. A lot of people will say a pony is anything below 14.2 hands, but that definition can vary depending on who you talk to. Pony can generally mean small horse in a lot of people's minds. It doesn't mean a baby horse, it just means smaller. But a lot of people, myself included, use it as a diminutive term of affection. The horse that I ride all the time is a giant 17.2 hand horse, which means that he's about 5'10" at the shoulders. So I cannot look over him, but I call him my little war pony or something of that nature on a regular basis. So it's just something that you want to think about. Some of the other terms you might hear referring to a horse, you might actually be pretty familiar with. While we typically don't eat horses, others do, but you have things that you might hear in common meat cutting terms like the loin over the top of their back here, or the flank, which is another type of a meat cut, which I know, disturbing way to describe it. You also get things like their haunches, which is the back, which you often would hear that term like a hound is sitting on their haunches or something of that nature. So these are terms that are a little bit more common in normal vernacular, not necessarily just equestrian. If you're going to hear others terms, sometimes you'll hear things like the fetlock, which is down here. Oftentimes you'll see horses that have a lot of hair down there and all the fluffy feathers all around their fetlocks and their hooves, and those are kind of cute, so a term that people sometimes hear. Or their hock, like it's the back knee, essentially, even though it's the ankle as we showed earlier. So just basic anatomy that you might hear. When you actually go into what the horse wears, a lot of people know some of the really basic things, like you have a saddle. It's the big leather thing that goes over a horse's back that the person sits on. Saddles are kind of like shoes in a way. They come in all different sizes and you have to fit the saddle to the horse. Ideally, you also want to fit it to yourself, but in my opinion, that's less important. I can easily make do with a wide range of saddle sizes for myself, but I can't put a pony horse saddle on a draft horse. How wide the saddle is really matters because you don't want to have it pinching the horse's shoulders and you don't want it hitting the horse's spine. The withers are kind of slightly pointed in a way. So you want to have clearance over their spine. If you see those big Western saddles, you'll see those handles on the front. That would be a pommel. Not all of our saddles have those. A lot of SCA saddles are bigger just because medieval saddles were bigger, but you will also see smaller saddles with a silhouette more like this. The saddle is held onto the horse by a girth. Unlike what it might say in books, you can't store swords and things like that under the horse's girth. It's not going to work. I was just kind of astounded at the Wheel of Time series when they kept saying that they were storing the guy's sword under the girth of the saddle so that it wouldn't get in the way while they were running, and it just hurt my brain. But in general, these are going to be the main pieces of equipment that you need: saddle, girth, and then something to control the head. So a bridle of some sort with reins, which are what you physically hold. The bridle can also have a bit, which is the piece of metal that goes in the horse's mouth. Something that people can occasionally get confused about is that is hurting the horse or things of that nature, but realistically a bit doesn't actually hurt a horse. It's just there to help control. Horses have front teeth, incisors, to help tear grass, and then they have a gap in their teeth, which is where the bit sits, and then they have teeth that actually grind. So the bit sits in this hole, so it's not in a place that's particularly painful. It's not like if you were to try to put something in your mouth, your teeth would be biting down on it. They actually have a place for the bit to go. And in case you didn't know, horses' teeth actually continue to grow as they get older, which I think is kind of cool. Many people know that rodents' teeth grow, but they don't know that horses' teeth also continue to grow. Most horses don't ever need anything to be done because just the act of eating helps wear it down enough. But some horses do actually need their teeth to be filed a little bit or to have burrs taken off or sharp bits, and that's called floating teeth. So, a random thing that maybe you didn't know. So, in the SCA, we have a little bit of additional gear that you sometimes see. You have the metal bits. This metal head plate would be called a chamfron. It's a piece of armor that protects the horse. It can have eye openings, or actually in some cases they completely cover the eyes. In some German jousting competitions, they actually want the horse to be completely blinded and just trust the rider so that they don't shy away from the oncoming jousters, which I thought was really counterintuitive in some ways, but then when I thought about it, it does make sense. But I think that would be terrifying to be a horse running, not being able to see anything. Connected to the chamfron can be something called a crinière. It is kind of an armadillo type piece of metal that can cover the horse's neck. Horses nowadays often have larger necks than they used to, so the stuff that we have now doesn't always fit modern horses, because horses in general have gotten bigger thanks to just breeding. We have a lot more breeds of horses nowadays than medieval people used to have. They had only a handful of breeds. They were not even really breeds. It was more classification of job that they did. So they had like destriers, which were war horses, and they had the old rundown horse type nags, and they had work horses essentially. I think those were the main classifications. I don't know if there were any more. I don't know if anyone here knows if there were any more. But in general.
Sorry, the palfrey was a term often referred to a very calm, quiet horse that the ladies would ride.
Okay,
So
that would be an additional one as well.
Yep.
So additional armor that a horse could wear would be something like a croupière, which would be something to cover the butt of the horse, or the croup. If we went back, the croup on the horse is here, so makes sense, croupière. Then you can also have things that are a little bit more just decorative and not necessarily functional. This stuff is, the metal is going to protect the horse if you're jousting or doing something like that. But you could have things called barding, which is, it can refer to everything, the metal, the decoration. It could also refer to just the fabric parts. You can have the decorative parts. In this case, Gwen and I have caparisons on our horses. Mine does not have the full head caparison. Gwen's does. That's her horse Jubal, I believe. And then another thing that I didn't mention earlier on the tack, tack meaning just the stuff that you use for a horse, the equipment. You'll oftentimes have a breastplate. This is to help keep the saddle forward and to also just help keep things in place a little bit. It's something that modern riders do use, and it is fairly common. However, I tend to see it a lot in SCA, especially jousting, because so much of the stuff that we have is big and heavy. If you have someone wearing armor, obviously you really don't want the saddle to move. If you have a really big saddle, it just helps keep things in place, and you're not looking for the dainty maneuverability of a small little English jumping saddle. You want something that's going to actually be sturdy and keep things where they are. So that was the general overview of horses and things that you might hear or see just in general. So how does that really apply to the SCA and what we do? So there are a bunch of different activities and games that SCA people take part in. We have things like rescue the maiden, rescue the princess, rescue the something. You have some, in this case, unicorn that you need to grab from one location and bring to another to save it. We have things like the spear throw, which Mistress Gwen is showing off here. It's a spear with a metal tip, typically, where you are going to throw it at a target while you are on the horse. You can do it from various speeds. Something that I didn't mention before is the different gaits a horse can do. There's walk, self-explanatory, trot, which is kind of like a jog, and canter or gallop, which is the running or sprinting. There are also some additional gaits for specialized horses, but there's really no need to go into those. Just know that there are others and they exist. The Icelandic horses, for example, really like to emphasize the fact that they are a horse with a special gait. So if you go to Iceland, expect them to go on and on about the tolt. So throwing the spear, there's something called reeds, which you have reeds of different sizes, little sticks, usually 1 to 6 inches, I believe, that you want to knock off while traveling between 2 sets of reeds using a sword. You can have random obstacles. In this case, it was a blue tarp. Tarps can be really scary if you're a horse. You don't really know what it is. Horses' eyes are on the side of their head, and they actually have a really good field of vision. However, it's not a fully binocular vision, and sometimes lower to the ground can be harder. So getting them to go over things, it can be a trust issue, and it can be a coordination issue of just, what is this thing? Can I actually step on it? Will it eat me? So there are a lot of other obstacles that you can do, but this was just one example. Here we have Mistress Eleanor, who's knocking some heads over, decapitating our little stands with a sword. And we have another example of kind of a rescue thing, but it's grab a bag and move it. So those are kind of simple little things, and they're not going to be overly... They're easier to introduce your horse to in a lot of ways than some of the other things, like this stuff. The SCA has full-on jousting. This is something that is much more exploratory, and it does have a very separate authorization, there we go, a separate authorization to be able to do that compared to the other equestrian games. But it, as far as it looks like a lot of fun, and it's something I would love to do someday, but we'll see if that ever actually happens. Here we have Mistress Eleanor, I believe, jousting against, why can I not think of her name?
Duchess Kenna.
Yes, Duchess Kenna. Duchess Kenna is also down here doing archery, which is something I also have not done on a horse yet, but hopefully will someday. Archery is not something that you see very often at events in the East Kingdom, at least. I don't know if it's more common in other kingdoms, but I would love to see more of it if possible. But we'll see how that goes. It's a little bit complicated because I believe you need archery marshals as well as equestrian marshals, but
Actually, you do not.
you don't?
No. Equestrian marshals are fully warranted to supervise equestrian activities. We are our own thrown weapons marshals. We are our own archery marshals, etc.
Okay.
That's from the Society Equestrian Marshal directly.
That's interesting.
That's a lot of people's take on it, but that is what the rule is.
I am an actual archery marshal, so I at least know that part of the rules for when I someday become an equestrian marshal. So that's a step in the right direction, right?
The biggest issue, just like archery, is having the space that people aren't going to be wandering into the
Yeah.
archery field, but that's the same archery everywhere, whether you have a horse or not.
One of the main reasons horses are so hard to have in SCA events is space, and add on archery and you really need a lot of space. So I can definitely see why it's not common. I mean, there's single digit number of events usually per year of equestrian events in the East Kingdom. The ones I can think of off the top of my head are South Region War Camp, Palio, Pantaria, Falling Leaves. There are a few more in the Southern region I don't typically go to. River Wars has it. That's not East Kingdom. So you can find equestrian events around, but not nearly as much as if you were out in the Western areas. But additional things you can do, as Alana of Sky is showing here, you can collect rings on a lance or on a sword. Mistress Eleanor is showing a higher advantage than what she's doing down here. And then you have Master Duncan, who is using a lance to hit a quintain, which is essentially a shield on a pivot point that you want to hit. If you ever watched A Knight's Tale, you see him using one of those to practice for jousting. It's a good target to actually hit, and it will move with your hit. So it's a good simulation of hitting an actual person. So this is definitely not all inclusive of what we do. There are also things like driving, so with a carriage, or just more little random obstacles that you find. But it's a good general representation. So if all of this interests you, getting involved has a bunch of options. You don't necessarily have to be a rider to be involved in the equestrian community. Just like with archery or thrown or heavy, we need support staff. We need people to help set up. We need people to help tear down. We need people to help with scoring. We need people to help with resetting targets. All of those things need to be done. Usually people who ride will also take turns ground crewing to some extent. The community in general tends to be very helpful towards each other and just tries to support each other, which is a great thing, I think. So if you want to get involved and you actually want to ride, if you have a horse, that makes things a lot easier. If you contact the marshal in charge and let them know you're coming, because typically you need things like Coggins forms or things of that nature, you can go authorize, and then ride. If you do not have a horse, things are a little bit more difficult, but are still possible. The main thing is, ideally, if you're going to try to ride in the SCA, you should be able to ride regularly. It's a bad idea to put a weapon in someone's hand if they can't first control the horse without the weapon. There are a lot of places around here that you can pay to take lessons. They have horses. It's not necessarily the cheapest thing in the world, but it exists and it's a good thing to do. Very few people in the SCA are going to be able or willing to take you from I have never ridden a horse to I am an experienced rider and can do games. You are probably going to have to make a significant effort to actually learn how to ride on your own. If you don't know how to ride, please don't lie about it. Please be upfront about what you're actually able to do. If you are a 5-year-old child and you just really want to go for a lead line ride on a horse, chances are people are going to be accepting of that, and someone there will let them at least pet the horse or maybe sit on the horse. Beyond that, don't expect an equestrian to let you hop immediately onto their horse. People are going to want to know you and want to trust you before they give you the reins. Think of it like an expensive sports car. If you go up to somebody who has a Porsche that you really love and say, "Oh my God, that's my favorite thing ever. Can I drive it?" Who are you? Why should they? Why should they let you? You are a random person off the street. You need to prove that it's actually a good idea. So how do you do that? Help out, volunteer. I mentioned that we need ground crew and things like that. That's a great way to meet the people in the equestrian community. It's a great way to get to talk with people and to be around the horses, maybe learn some of their personalities. A lot of the people there are going to be content to have you help groom or take care of their horse with you if you want to maybe try and buddy up with that person. The way I got into all of this was exactly what I'm saying. I went to Palio, which was my first time going there, not even knowing that Equestrian was there. I had been riding ever since I was a little girl, but I didn't know that the SCA had Equestrian. So I just kind of hung out by the arena and was staring like, oh my God, there are horses here. What is this? And then Duchess Cathain saw me and came over and was just like, looks like you're interested. And I definitely was. So she introduced me to Mistress Eleanor, who just had to step away and was here earlier. And I got to know Mistress Eleanor. I volunteered to help at events. I helped out with grooming Mistress Eleanor's horses because I just wanted to get involved. She has always been super generous with the horses. She has 4 of them, which is quite a staggering number if you know how much work a horse is, which they really are a lot of work. People don't necessarily realize this. So I was able to make a connection with her over time. It seems like she trusted me and she let me ride her horses, and I got to start going in events on her horses, and I ended up winning Consort's champion on her horse Tay. So I was super appreciative of the fact that she was willing to share him with me. And a lot of our community is like that. A lot of people want others to be able to enjoy themselves and to get involved. I personally really love the group, and hopefully other people, if they get involved, will feel the same way. And it's, like I said, not as straightforward to get into as something like archery is, where you can literally go up, say, I want to try, and they'll hand you a bow. But I think it's definitely worth it. So do people have any questions at all?
I'd just make one comment. Horses, just like any animal, dogs, cats, have very, very distinct personalities.
They do.
And there are some horses that you simply cannot put another person on.
Yeah.
So if an owner is, if you're an accomplished horse person, have already proven that, and you're not being offered a horse, the owner knows their horse. My horse Jubilant, I can't just put anybody on. He is a devil. He likes to crow hop and buck, and I'm not going to put an average rider on him and have that person risk injury or also fear of never wanting to do it again. So as horse owners, we have a responsibility to not only protect our animals, but to protect the people that might want to ride them. And so a lot of times I think there's a misunderstanding as to why we are not letting people get on our horses. And it's 99% of the time because the horse is either not suitable or has quirks that you just can't put someone else on.
Yeah, that is a very common thing. The horse that I ride most often is Royce. It's the picture that where Gwen and I were next to each other with the comparisons. He is a sweetheart. I love him. He is very affectionate. He's also an asshole. Plain and simple. He is afraid of everything. He, I swear, has ADHD and anxiety. If a leaf blows, it's, oh no, I'm going to get eaten, and he bolts. I can control it because I am used to him and I know what he's going to do. I know his reactions. If you don't know him and he doesn't trust you, he's even worse. And that would just be a disaster. We do not need a 2,000-pound animal charging around a field with people everywhere, scared out of his mind. That just sounds like a disaster to me.
Yeah, I have a question.
Feel free to ask.
Oh, am I on?
Yep, I can hear you.
My name is Phil, and I did some riding in college. So I'm not a complete beginner. Our local SCA group has an event in the springtime, usually, that has equestrian events, which we attended a couple of years ago, and it was really a lot of fun to watch. My question is, most horses either come from either a Western training or an English training background, and I'm wondering how that relates to training for SCA events.
Honestly, I don't think it really matters. The horse I currently ride, his background is primarily dressage and fox hunting and jumping. So it's very eclectic. When you're doing games, you need to mostly be able to keep a certain gait, so walk, trot, canter, and you need to be able to maneuver the horse. Much of what you're doing is single-handed, so in that regard, Western might have a slight advantage because a lot of people who ride Western already are used to riding with one hand.
Oh, gosh.
But it's not something that inherently is going to be super beneficial one way or the other. It really is a personal choice and a style choice, I think. But you can do games with almost any background. It might be a little bit more awkward if you rode side saddle, but you could probably do it. It might be a little bit more awkward if you did saddle seat riding, because saddle seat, they do all of their control through their hands. And it's a much more upright thing, and they don't use their legs nearly as much for turning, and that would actually probably be really difficult. But otherwise, I can't think of any problems.
It's more the temperament to the obstacles that is more important with which horses are suitable. Some horses, especially horses with formal dressage training, are not used to noise and clanking and banging. And when you hit a quintain, there's a lot of noise involved.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Like-
so that's what I'd probably share with that, is that the breed really doesn't matter, the seat. There are a lot of gaited animals used in the Midwest and South. There are a lot of mules and draft mules used in the Midwest and West. They all do fine.
Interesting. So it's a separate type of training that comes after one's horse is trained to English or
Yeah,
English or Western.
it involves desensitization, so getting a horse used to the fact that there's a sword moving around their head. That's not something that they're typically going to be exposed to. So just having a sword near them or having a lance near them and having the noises like Gwen mentioned. Tesoro, the horse that I won champs on, he is terrified of chainmail for some reason. Even now, he cannot have anyone in armor or chain on him because he just reacts really badly to it. I wasn't thinking of it, and I had essentially a coin belt on, and that sounds a lot like chainmail. So he started freaking out. He's great at the games, but he'll never be a jouster. He doesn't like that metal sound.
Interesting.
Cool. And on that note, also, horses come in different sizes, just like people. So if you are a larger person and you are talking to someone on a smaller horse, that might not be a good fit. You have to remember that a horse is only supposed to hold a certain amount of weight. So if you are a large person, you need a bigger horse to accommodate it. Tall can make things a little bit awkward. If you are a really tall person, it's going to be weird if you're on a pony, but it's doable if you're within the weight range. But that weight range really does matter. Which is one of the reasons you tend to see bigger horses jousting, because they have to not only support the person, but all the armor on the person.
Cool.
Any additional questions? Okay, so something that I wanted to point out is that there are some online references for people if you want to check it out. There is an East Kingdom Equestrian site, which any of you can easily go to. And on that site, there is a list to the Equestrian handbook. It's pretty much the stuff that you ideally should know if you're going to be working with horses at an event. It details exactly what some of the games are. It gives you rules for what your weapons and setup should look like, things of that nature. I can put a link to this in the Facebook event if people want, so that you can easily get to PDFs. Beyond that, I think that's about it. And I will stop sharing. And just in case anybody wants to ask a question